Have you ever gone through a very strange night? One where your body is exhausted but your mind refuses to sleep. Not because of any specific worry, but because something inside you no longer wants to be ignored. Not loud, not dramatic. Just a vague sense that if you fall asleep like every other night, you will continue living exactly as before. And for some reason, that no longer feels comfortable. Jung would not call such nights a sleep disorder, but a moment when inner life quietly knocks on the door, asking softly, "Are you still living from the right place within yourself?" We often believe that a life only changes when there is a big decision or a clear external event. But Jung saw change through a different, quieter logic. He believed that life does not truly change when circumstances change, but when the inner position from which you experience everything shifts. And sometimes, for that shift to occur, it does not require years of therapy or grand declarations, only one night that is quiet enough, still enough, without running away, for the daytime ego to loosen its grip and inner life to be allowed to appear. It only takes one night to change your life is not a promise of miracles, nor a story of loud awakening. It is a very precise psychological map in the spirit of Carl Jung, guiding you through deeper layers where the ego loosens its hold, the persona falls away, the shadow begins to reclaim its energy. Dreams appear not to be explained but to orient, and inner truth is seen before any action takes place. Because for Jung, real transformation is never noisy. It begins in silence, in a night when you do not run away, and from that moment on, however slowly, your life can no longer continue along the same old axis. Number 1. One night does not create results. It creates an axis of life. There is a very common misunderstanding about change. We are taught that a life only changes when something external changes, a new job, the end of a relationship, a bold decision, a dramatic turn. And so, when hearing the phrase, "It only takes one night to change your life," many people immediately think of a miracle, a dramatic event, a moment where you wake up the next morning and everything is different. But from a Jungian perspective, this phrase does not say that one night is enough to create results. It says that one night can be enough to change the way you see your entire life. One night is not enough to change your finances. One night is not enough to heal relationships. One night is not enough to turn you into a different person in the eyes of society. But one night can be enough to change the inner position from which you view your whole life. And when that position changes, everything else will eventually be forced to shift as well, slowly, quietly, even if no one notices right away. There are two levels of change in human life, yet very few people distinguish between them. The first level is the level of results. This is what we are used to measuring: what you do, where you are, who you are with, how much you earn, whether you are loved or abandoned, successful or failing. This level is loud, visible, and easy to describe to others. It is the part that society notices, evaluates, and often mistakes for life itself. But beneath it lies another level, quieter, less discussed, and far more decisive. That is the level of the psychological axis, the invisible point from which the ego stands to perceive, feel, and interpret everything that happens. Two people can live in the same circumstances and yet not live in the same life at all. One experiences every situation as a threat to be avoided. The other experiences the same situation as a signal to be listened to. One feels constantly mistreated by life. The other, under the same conditions, feels guided. The difference is not in external results, but in the inner axis, the unseen standpoint from which the world is experienced. Carl Jung was not primarily concerned with how to change circumstances. He was interested in a deeper question. From where within themselves are people experiencing those circumstances? Because for Jung, life does not truly change when events change, but when the center of experience shifts. When the ego no longer stands in the old position, a position of defense, fear, or constant self-justification, and quietly moves to another point where life is seen through a new lens. One night, in this phrase, is not a unit of time. It is a moment of inner repositioning, a moment when you are no longer standing in the same old place to look at life, even though external life remains exactly the same. There is no miracle, no blinding light, just a very small shift, but one sufficient to make it impossible for everything to return to how it was before. Imagine standing on a rotating bridge. For years, the bridge turns in a familiar direction. Every event, success or failure, is seen from the same angle. You become so accustomed to that perspective that you believe it is reality itself. Then one night, very quietly, very ordinarily, the bridge turns just a few degrees. No one around you notices. There is no loud sound. But from the next morning onward, everything you see is slightly off angle. Not much, but enough that you can no longer pretend you are standing where you used to be. That is the axis of life. There is a man in his 40s working in a large company with a family and responsibilities who appears from the outside to lack nothing. He has fulfilled his roles for many years, going to work regularly, meeting obligations, keeping everything stable. He is not truly happy, but he does not allow himself to fall into instability. For him, living means maintaining what already exists. One night after a long day, he sits alone in his dark living room. There is no crisis, no important decision, no deep reflection. He simply sits there, for the first time, not trying to reassure himself that everything is fine. And in that silence, he admits something very simple that he has always avoided. I've lived too long as if this life were just a series of responsibilities to be completed. There are no tears, no immediate actions, no plans for change. But in that moment, his inner position has already shifted. He no longer sees life as a burden to carry properly, but as something that needs to be lived truthfully. This is what Carl Jung meant when he emphasized the center of experience. When that center changes, you do not need to force yourself to change your behavior immediately. You do not need to do anything big. Life will reorganize itself around the new axis, just as water naturally flows according to a new slope in the terrain. As Jung once wrote, "Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakes." He did not say this to encourage withdrawal from the world, but to point out that awakening does not begin by fixing external life, but by recognizing where you are living from within yourself. A night like this does not produce results. It does not give answers. It does not solve problems. But it does something more important. It resets the question. Not, how can my life change? But, from where within myself am I living this life? And once that question is asked from a new position, the old life has already begun to end, even if nothing on the surface shows it yet. Jung did not promise miracles. He did not say that one night would save you. He only suggested that there are nights quiet enough, honest enough, free enough from escape for you to leave an old inner position without destroying your life. And it is precisely this silent shift that causes life, over time, to begin operating according to a different logic, slower, truer, and less violent towards yourself. So, when we say it only takes one night to change your life, what should be heard is not hope, but responsibility, the responsibility for where you stand within yourself. There is no miracle, but there is an axis shift. And sometimes, that alone is enough to ensure that everything else, sooner or later, cannot help but change as well. Number 2. By day, the ego holds power. By night, the ego weakens. After the inner axis begins to shift, something very natural happens, even if not everyone notices it right away. You begin to see more clearly who has been coordinating your life during the day, not with judgment, nor with denial of its role, but with a calm recognition. Jung called this part the ego. In Jungian psychology, the ego is not the enemy of inner development. It is not something to be destroyed, transcended, or dissolved. The ego is the center of daytime consciousness, the part that helps a person locate themselves in the world, knowing who you are, what you are doing, how to respond appropriately to circumstances. Because of the ego, you can wake up on time, complete tasks, respond to messages, keep promises, maintain relationships, and ensure that life does not collapse into chaos. Without the ego, a person could not function in social life. And so Jung never considered the ego to be bad. He simply saw it as a necessary structure with limits. By day, the ego operates like a quiet but persistent coordinator. It constantly makes decisions, from the smallest matters to more significant choices. It compares, evaluates, and adjusts behavior so that you can adapt to your surroundings. Thanks to the ego, you know when to speak, when to remain silent, when to move forward, and when to hold back. The ego helps you maintain roles, images, and a minimum level of stability so that life does not collapse under external pressure. But this capacity for control is not infinite. Every decision, every act of self-restraint, every moment of appearing fine when you are not, consumes psychological energy. Many people mistake end-of-day exhaustion as a result of too much work, when the deeper cause lies in continuously maintaining a controlled sense of self. The ego does not merely work, it must constantly regulate, stabilize, and keep everything within acceptable limits. By the end of the day, it is often the first part to run out of energy. At night, when external stimulation decreases, when no one needs your immediate response, when social demands temporarily subside, the ego begins to reveal its limits. Not because it has been defeated, nor because something is wrong, but simply because it no longer has enough energy to maintain absolute control. Jung expressed this with a short but precise sentence. The ego is only the center of consciousness, not the center of the whole personality. By day, the ego is often mistaken for the center of the entire person. By night, that limitation naturally becomes visible. What is important to emphasize here is that when the ego weakens, no new content appears yet. There are no special messages, no clear images, no intense emotions, nothing to understand or decode. There is simply a subtle shift in who gets to speak. By day, the ego always speaks first, explains first, labels first. By night, the ego speaks less. It does not disappear, but it no longer has exclusive authority. And it is precisely this loss of exclusivity, however difficult to notice, that allows a single night to become a turning point, even when nothing seems to change outwardly. This can be clearly seen in Anna's story. Anna works in an environment that demands quick responses and high levels of control. During the day, she is used to always staying on top of things, making timely decisions, and resolving issues before they escalate. She replies to emails as soon as they arrive, plans every task in detail, and rarely allows herself to slow down. For Anna, proactivity and control are how she keeps life from descending into disorder. But at night, when she returns to her quiet apartment, Anna notices a very small but clear shift. She no longer wants to continue thinking about unfinished tasks. Not because she is lazy, nor because she is avoiding responsibility, but simply because the part of her that organizes, evaluates, and controls is tired. This moment reveals clearly that Anna's ego has relinquished full control, and although she may not realize it at the time, this loosening creates the necessary space for deeper shifts to occur later. Jung was very cautious in speaking about such moments. He did not regard them as mystical experiences, nor as signs of dramatic awakening. For Jung, this is simply the natural functioning of the psyche, when it is no longer under constant pressure to adapt. When the ego is tired, it no longer has the strength to cover every experience with a rational explanation. And it is precisely when this explanatory layer thins that people begin to experience life differently, even if they cannot yet name how. This feeling can be described in very ordinary terms. During the day, it is like driving for hours on a highway, hands gripping the steering wheel, eyes constantly alert, every movement carefully controlled. When the car finally stops at the end of the day, the driver does not disappear, but no longer grips the wheel as tightly. There is a natural pause where no further control or decisions are needed, allowing body and attention to recalibrate. The ego at night operates in the same way. It does not leave, but it stops gripping everything as tightly as it does during the day. This also explains why many people find nighttime uncomfortable, not because something is wrong, but because the ego no longer has the strength to shield vague feelings. During the day, you can quickly label everything: right, wrong, should, shouldn't. At night, those labels no longer function as effectively. But this is not yet the time to delve into other contents. This is merely a transitional phase, where psychological authority begins to move away from the familiar center. One night does not change life through action. It changes life by revealing the limits of the controlling ego. When you realize that you do not need and cannot continuously control every experience, you begin to step slightly back from yourself, not to give up, but to allow life to operate at a different rhythm. Jung never advised abandoning the ego. He simply reminded us that the ego cannot and should not be the sole driver. A night quiet enough for the ego to grow tired, long enough for authority to disperse rather than remain concentrated, is the first condition for further inner shifts. At this stage, no new content appears. No messages are delivered. There is only a simple truth. By day, you live under the ego's coordination. By night, that power begins to disperse. And it is precisely this dispersion, however light and difficult to notice, that is indispensable for any deeper transformation. Because only when power is no longer absolutely centralized can a person begin to encounter other aspects of psychic life that are overshadowed during the day. But that belongs to later chapters. Here, In this first night, the only thing that truly happens is that the ego no longer holds total authority. And sometimes that alone is enough for life to begin turning in a different direction, even if no one can yet say what that direction is. Number 3. Silence as a psychological threshold. So what happens after daytime authority loosens, but before any new inner content appears? Many people mistake this phase for relaxation, rest, or a form of technical meditation. But from a Jungian perspective, what is happening here is neither relaxation nor a method to achieve a better state. This is a transitional state, a fragile middle zone where consciousness has not dissolved, but the unconscious has not yet spoken. Jung referred to this as a threshold. Silence in this sense is not a pleasant calm. It does not immediately bring relief. On the contrary, many people experience it as unfamiliar, empty, even slightly unsettling. This is because the familiar mechanisms used to define and control experience no longer function smoothly, while no new structure has yet replaced them. You are no longer busy enough to forget yourself, but not yet deep enough to encounter something else. You are simply staying with yourself without addition or subtraction. What matters here is the act of staying. Staying is not doing. It is not understanding. It is certainly not analyzing. Staying is a very particular psychological act, not fixing the experience, not assigning meaning, not escaping into another activity, simply not leaving the moment that is present, even if that moment is uncomfortable, unclear, and devoid of control. In many spiritual traditions and mythologies, this phase is always described as a pause before the true journey begins. In the Odyssey, before Odysseus can continue his journey home, he is held on Calypso's island, not in intense suffering, nor in battle, but in prolonged suspension, where no clear progress occurs. Myth does not include this episode to slow the story, but to emphasize that there are moments when a person must remain in a state of not yet moving forward, because nothing inside is ready to enter the next stage. Nighttime silence carries the same structure. Jung approached these states not with mystical language, but with precise psychological observation. When the nervous system is no longer constantly stimulated from the outside, and when the conscious center no longer maintains absolute control, the brain shifts into a different mode of operation. Modern neuroscience calls this a transition from task-oriented networks to the default mode network, where the brain is not focused on action or goals, but on integrating experience. In this state, the brain is not resting, it is reorganizing. It is like a system that requires empty space to rearrange data before new information can be meaningfully integrated. The key point is this: at this stage, there is no content to understand yet. Any attempt to interpret, label, or force meaning to appear is simply the ego trying to return to its old position. Jung was deeply wary of this tendency. He believed one of the most common mistakes of modern humans is their inability to tolerate the state of not knowing, leading them to fill it prematurely with borrowed meanings. Yet it is precisely this unfilled space that allows the psyche to move in depth. Jung once wrote a sentence that captures the essence of this state. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. He did not say this to glorify darkness, but to point out that transformation does not begin by seeking light, but by having the courage to remain in the unclear zone where no answers are yet available. Silence as a psychological threshold does not require you to do it well. It does not judge whether you are staying correctly. It asks only one very simple but difficult question. Can you refrain from escaping your own experience for long enough? Not escaping into thought, action, entertainment, or attempts to fix things. Simply staying. This is not surrender nor passivity. It is a state of alert non-intervention, a presence without manipulation. In Jungian language, this is the moment when consciousness has not dissolved, but has also not imposed structure on experience. It is a fragile state, easily disrupted if one hastily seeks the familiar sense of control. Many people report that such nights pass very slowly. There is no climax, no major revelation, just a sense that time stretches, and that one's own presence becomes clearer in each moment. But this slowness is not stagnation. It is a sign that the psyche is quietly shifting from a mode of operation to a mode of reception. The state has changed, even if no content has yet appeared. And because there is nothing to grasp or name, this phase is easily overlooked or dismissed. Modern people are accustomed to measuring change by visible results, so a state that produces no clear answers is often considered useless or insignificant. Yet, for Jung, this phase is indispensable in any process of transformation, because without a threshold, there can be no crossing, and without a pause, nothing genuinely new can emerge from within. Silence in the night, in this sense, is not a destination to be achieved, but a door. And that door does not open through effort or willpower, but through staying, not staying to achieve something, but staying long enough for the old to stop occupying the entire inner space. Only then can deeper layers of the psyche begin to speak in their own way, without being rushed or pre-directed. But that is the story of later sections. Here, at this very threshold, the only thing that truly needs to happen is that you do not leave, not out of fear, not out of impatience, nor out of the desire to quickly return to the familiar. And sometimes, simply staying in that silence on an ordinary night is enough for life to begin shifting, even if no one, including yourself, can yet name what has changed. And perhaps that is why Jung always emphasized that true transformation is never loud. Just one such night, quiet enough, honest enough, free enough from escape, can silently reset the direction of an entire life. If you have ever gone through such a night, not dramatic, not eventful, just a moment of silence where you no longer wanted to run from yourself, share your story in the comments. It does not need to be complete, nor contain a lesson, only to be real. Because sometimes, simply realizing that someone else has also stayed in that same ambiguous space is enough for an experience to no longer feel isolated. Number 4. Night as a state of regression, the retreat of consciousness. Silence does not open immediate understanding. It opens a different psychological movement, where consciousness no longer pushes forward to control, but quietly retreats, allowing a deeper restructuring process to occur, what Jung called regression. From Jung's perspective, this is the moment when the psyche enters a very particular state, one that is often misunderstood or even feared. In everyday language, regression sounds negative, evoking images of decline, weakness, or loss of control. But for Jung, regression is not a return that causes one to lose oneself. It is a necessary retreat that allows the entire psychic structure to reorganize at a deeper level. Regression in the Jungian sense is not a return to childhood in terms of memories or emotions, nor a descent into chaos. It is the withdrawal of consciousness from its central position of control, allowing psychic energy to flow toward more primordial layers, less shaped by roles, goals, and adaptive pressures. During the day, consciousness cannot regress, not because regression is unnecessary, but because consciousness has another task: keeping life functioning, maintaining a stable ego, ensuring adaptation to the external world. Only when those demands subside does regression become possible. Night facilitates this retreat, not through force, but through the absence of pressure. When no one is waiting for your response, when no task requires immediate completion, when no social gaze demands that you be someone, consciousness naturally loses its reason to remain at the front line. It is not pushed away, it withdraws. And this withdrawal is what makes many people feel uneasy, because they are accustomed to living in a constant forward tension. Jung described this process as more biological than conscious choice. The psyche, like the body, needs cycles of expansion and contraction. If it is always stretched outward, always oriented toward adaptation and control, it will exhaust itself. Regression is the necessary contraction phase, where energy is no longer spent maintaining images and roles, but redirected inward to be redistributed. Jung expressed this logic plainly. No tree, it is said, can grow to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell. Regression, in this sense, is not a step backward in life, but a prerequisite for deeper rooting before growth can continue in a new direction. Many people experience this state without being able to name it. They simply feel slower, less sharp, or less motivated at night. But upon closer examination, this is not a loss of energy. It is a redirection of energy. Instead of being expended outward to maintain familiar structures, psychic energy begins flowing inward, toward deeper layers rarely touched by daytime consciousness. And because consciousness measures value through productivity and results, this inward shift is easily misinterpreted as weakness. A very ordinary example can clarify this process. Some people only realize how tired they are when they finally sit down after a long day. While still moving and working, the body continues to push itself to complete tasks. But once movement stops, heaviness emerges. This does not mean the fatigue just appeared. It means the body has finally been allowed to acknowledge it. Regression of consciousness works in the same way. It does not create new disorder. It allows deeper layers to appear after being obscured all day. This process can be imagined like the movement of the tide. By day, the water is high, covering the surface, with all movement directed outward. By night, the tide recedes, not to leave the shore barren, but to reveal the underlying structure that has always been there but rarely seen. Regression carries no message. It simply reveals terrain, and that terrain becomes the foundation for new structures to emerge later. It is important to emphasize that regression is not something you need to do correctly. It requires no technique, no effort, and carries no moral weight. It occurs naturally when conditions are right. And night, with its reduced demands on consciousness, provides those conditions. When you stop trying to understand who you are, stop forcing yourself to feel a certain way, and stop trying to return to familiar states through analysis or action, consciousness naturally retreats a step. At this point, many people panic and quickly pull themselves back through familiar means, scrolling on a phone, turning on noise, thinking incessantly, or reassuring themselves with rational explanations. They are not wrong. They are simply unaccustomed to allowing consciousness to relinquish its central position. But Jung believed that if people never learn to permit this retreat, their psychic life becomes stuck in an old structure, regardless of how much external change occurs. Jung viewed this process simply. He trusted that the psyche, like the body, knows how to self-regulate when not excessively interfered with. People do not always need to push forward, overcome, or become better. Sometimes, the healthiest thing is to slow down. And for that reason, a night of regression does not make you weaker, even if it appears so externally. It does not cause you to lose direction, even if direction temporarily disappears. It does one quiet but vital thing. It stops forcing the psyche to move forward when the foundation beneath is not yet ready. That is why Jung emphasized that restructuring cannot occur without regression. At this stage, one night does not change your life through action or decisions. It changes your life by allowing consciousness to retreat, giving deeper layers of the psyche space to reorganize. And even if you see no results yet, restructuring has already begun from within. But as with all previous sections, regression is not an end point. It is a phase. One night may be enough to initiate this process, but not to complete it. Here, the only thing truly required is that you do not interfere with the retreat through fear or control, because only when consciousness accepts its temporary withdrawal from the center can the psyche reorganize according to a deeper, more stable, and more truthful order. Here, on this night of retreat, the only thing that needs to be understood is this. Sometimes, to truly change direction, a person does not need to move forward, but needs the courage to step back. And sometimes, just one night that allows this retreat to happen is enough for life to begin moving according to an entirely different logic, even if no one, including yourself, can yet name what that change is. Number 5. Persona falls away when there is no audience. After the gentle regression of consciousness at night, when energy is no longer pushed outward to maintain control, something else begins to happen very naturally, though it is rarely named clearly. The familiar roles a person inhabits gradually lose their footing, not because someone strips them away, and not because the person deliberately chooses to live more authentically, but simply because the conditions that allow those roles to exist are temporarily no longer present. This change does not arrive through conflict or confrontation, but through the quiet absence of the very elements that once sustained the mask: gaze, expectation, feedback, and the need for recognition. When these elements withdraw, the persona no longer has a foundation from which to continue operating as it does during the day. In Jungian psychology, the part responsible for appearing before the world is called the persona. The persona is not falsehood in a moral sense, but a necessary mask that allows human beings to live in society. Through the persona, you know how to speak in a meeting, how to behave with your family, what image to present in order to be accepted. The persona exists through being seen, through feedback, through the expectations of others. It requires an audience in order to function. During the day, when the world is still watching you, when roles are still being called by name, the persona operates smoothly. It helps you maintain image, position, and consistency in the eyes of others. But at night, especially on nights when consciousness has retreated and no longer stands on the front line, the audience disappears. No one is waiting for your response. No gaze is demanding that you be a certain version of yourself. And when there is no audience, the persona has nothing to do, not because you decide to drop the role, but because there is no stage on which the role can be called forth. This falling away is not dramatic. It does not resemble a collapse of identity. It is usually felt very lightly, very ordinarily. A sense of not needing to keep up an image anymore. Many people describe that moment as both relieving and empty. Relieving because for the first time that day, they do not have to perform. Empty because when the role temporarily leaves, they do not immediately know who they are without it. That emptiness often confuses people, but in Jungian logic, it is not a sign of loss. It is a sign that a space has just opened. Jung once wrote very bluntly about this. The persona is that which in reality one is not, but which oneself as well as others think one is. The persona is not the essence of a person, but an image maintained by a tacit agreement between the individual and the collective. When that agreement is temporarily suspended at night, the mask does not need to be torn off. It is simply set down. And it is precisely this setting down, unforced, undramatic, that is the crucial point of the psychological movement Jung described. This can be seen very clearly in the story of a public figure like David Bowie, a global icon of music and fashion, known for his ability to continually reinvent his image and artistic identity on stage. Throughout different phases of his life, Bowie appeared before the public in strikingly different personas: Ziggy Stardust, the Thin White Duke, and then completely contrasting images in later periods. Yet Bowie himself shared that the most important moments of his life did not occur on stage, but during periods of being alone, when he no longer had to maintain any image at all. It was in those nights without an audience that he felt the exhaustion of constantly being someone. And from there, he allowed himself to change his image more truthfully rather than merely refreshing it to impress. What matters is not that Bowie found his true self, but that he dared to let periods without any role exist long enough for a new image to form on its own. This aligns closely with Jung's understanding of the persona. The mask does not fall because a person becomes braver, but because the context no longer requires it to exist. When there is no gaze, no role to defend, the persona loses its function. And when it loses its function, it naturally retreats, like a tool being set down when it is no longer needed. Here, there is no act of throwing it away, only a cessation of use. This moment often leaves people feeling confused. They may feel that they don't quite know how they are, or that they don't know what they're supposed to feel. But in Jungian logic, this is not an identity crisis. It is a sign that the psyche has entered a very rare zone, a zone where there is no need to perform. No need to play a role, no need to prove anything. A zone where value is no longer measured by the reactions of others, but by the bare presence of oneself. What must be emphasized is this: the falling away of the persona at night does not mean that a person has reached inner truth. It only indicates that one intermediary layer is no longer covering everything. Jung was very careful here. He did not claim that when the persona falls away, a person instantly becomes authentic or awakened. He only said that at that moment, a person is no longer compelled to be an image. And it is precisely this not being compelled to be someone that is so rare in modern life. That is why the accompanying feeling, is often a strange sense of relief. Relief from the burden of maintaining an image. But there is also a gap, because during most of the day, we are used to defining ourselves through roles. When those roles temporarily withdraw, the gap appears not to create confusion, but to create space. A space that had previously been filled by schedules, responsibilities, and expectations. Jung did not advise people to try to live without a persona. He understood very clearly that the mask is necessary for social life, but he also emphasized that if a person completely identifies with the persona, they will become depleted. Nights like these, when there is no audience, are rare opportunities for a person to remember that they are not only their daytime roles, not to deny the roles, but not to be swallowed by them. A night when the persona falls away does not produce immediate results. The next morning, you will still return to your roles. You still need the persona to live. But a very subtle difference has occurred. You no longer fully believe that you are that mask. A small distance has been created between the person and the role, and that distance, however fragile, is one of the things that can quietly transform an entire life later on. Because once you know that you can exist, even for just one night without performing, the persona no longer controls you absolutely. And sometimes just one such night without an audience is enough for life to begin turning in another direction, very gently, very slowly, but irreversibly. Number 6. A practical story. 1. A sleepless night and the collapse of the persona. After the persona loses its function due to the absence of an audience, what remains is not the immediate appearance of a true self, but a very concrete emptiness in lived experience, a space where the role is no longer maintained and nothing else has yet taken its place. This emptiness is rarely recognized through concepts or philosophical language. It usually appears in very ordinary forms: a sleepless night, a prolonged pause, an uncomfortable feeling with no clear cause, and something that is almost impossible to describe to others without distorting it. John Miller is an American man in his mid-30s, living in the suburbs of Chicago. He works in finance, a stable field with a clear trajectory and little risk. In the eyes of his colleagues, John is reliable, composed, and rarely lets emotions interfere with his work. He speaks moderately, dresses neatly, and reacts appropriately in all social situations. No one considers him outstanding, but no one doubts his competence or attitude. From the outside, John's life runs very correctly. He has a good job, a modest apartment, and a social circle that is neither very close nor isolating. He knows where he stands in the social structure, and he holds that position steadily. There are no signs of an impending crisis, and no events foreshadow an inner rupture. During the day, John almost never questions himself. Not because he avoids it, but because there is no reason to ask. A full schedule, clear tasks, stable roles. His persona functions so smoothly that it becomes invisible. It does not need to be thought about, because it is always context appropriate. In Jungian terms, this is precisely the state in which the persona and social life overlap so completely that a person can no longer distinguish between role and self. That night, John could not sleep, not because of work stress. There was no important meeting the next day, no unresolved personal conflict. He simply lay in bed in a dark room and realized that his body would not enter sleep. The hours passed, All familiar methods failed, closing his eyes, relaxing, reassuring himself that tomorrow will be fine. And it was there that the first thing to crack was not thought, but the ability to maintain his familiar inner image. John no longer had enough energy to continue feeling like a stable person. He no longer had the strength to sustain the sense of control that came so naturally during the day. His usual self-talk lost its effect. It did not disappear, but became hollow, like lines spoken in a room where no one is listening anymore. Emotions began to surface, without order, a fatigue with no clear cause, a sadness not tied to any specific memory, a faint but persistent sense of alienation. John did not panic. He did not collapse. But he realized something very clearly and very strangely. He was no longer playing John Miller as he did during the day. There was no one witnessing this moment. No one required him to respond appropriately. No social space remained for the persona to operate. And when there is no gaze, no feedback, no expectation, the mask does not need to be taken off. It simply falls from its position. John sat up, walked into the kitchen, and poured himself a glass of water. The apartment was so quiet that he could clearly hear his own footsteps. In that space, he felt something very strange. He did not know who he was at that moment, and nothing catastrophic happened. There was no dramatic collapse, no intense sense of being lost, just a very clear bareness. This feeling did not bring comfort. It was both light and empty. Light because there was no need to appear stable, strong, or reliable. Empty because when the familiar role vanished, no other identity appeared immediately to replace it. There was only the bare presence of a human being who was not doing anything, not proving anything, not representing any role. From Jung's perspective, this was not a moment of transformation, much less awakening. It was simply the temporary collapse of the persona due to the absence of the conditions that sustain it. Consciousness had retreated. Energy was no longer being used to maintain an image. And in that space, a person does not become more authentic, but becomes no longer required to perform. John drew no lesson from that night. He did not decide to change jobs. He did not think about living his truth. He could not even think clearly about anything. Near dawn, he drifted into a half-sleep, half-waking state, carrying no conclusions with him. The next morning, John woke up and prepared for work. The persona returned quickly, almost without delay. He dressed, drove, and engaged in conversations as usual. No one noticed what had happened during that sleepless night. On the surface, everything was exactly the same. But something had changed, even if it could not be named. Not because John had realized something about himself, but because he had experienced existing without maintaining an image, even if only for a few hours. And that experience carried no truth, no direction, but it left a very small distance between the person and the role. Jung emphasized that moments like these should not be hastily interpreted. They do not exist to teach or guide. They simply reveal one stark fact. When the persona collapses, not through conflict, but through the absence of an audience, the person still exists, not better, not worse, just exists. John's sleepless night did not create transformation. It did not immediately redirect his life, but it illustrated very clearly what Jung always warned. The collapse of the persona does not mean the emergence of the true ego. Sometimes it is simply a pause where the psyche stops performing, and sometimes Just that cessation of performance is enough to unsettle a structure once believed to be solid, even before anything new has formed to replace it. Number 7. The shadow appears as a demand to reclaim energy. After the persona has fallen away at night, after a person has experienced existing without maintaining an image or playing a role before anyone, what appears next is often not a clear insight or a truth that instantly makes everything meaningful. On the contrary, it arrives more slowly, more heavily, and is usually more uncomfortable than pleasant. Not as a new thought, but as a weighted inner feeling, a quiet pressure that emerges, as if something within you is demanding the return of energy that has been suppressed for too long. From Jung's perspective, this is the moment when the shadow begins to enter lived experience. In Jungian psychology, the shadow is not understood as the bad part in a conventional moral sense. It is not evil, not darkness to be destroyed, nor something to be quickly fixed so that a person can become better. The shadow is simply the parts of you that were once not allowed to appear openly in consciousness because they did not fit the image you needed to maintain in order to be accepted by society. This may include anger you learned to swallow, a desire for control deemed selfish, a need for attention labeled as weakness, or a longing to live differently that was pushed aside as unrealistic. These parts do not disappear. They are merely pushed outside the field you permit yourself to see. During the day, when the persona functions well and consciousness has enough energy to control, the shadow is usually kept at a safe distance. You know when to stop, what to say and what not to say, how to behave appropriately. Consciousness is strong enough to suppress, organize and label all out-of-place emotions. But at night, when the persona has nothing to do and consciousness is tired, that barrier becomes thinner. The shadow does not need to rebel or cause chaos. It does not need to break anything. It only needs permission to appear. And it is precisely this quiet appearance, undramatic as it is, that carries a very real, very lived, and very hard to ignore force. The crucial point here is that the shadow does not appear to make a person worse. It appears because life energy that has been locked away for too long begins to seek a return to consciousness. When a part of inner life is suppressed for an extended period, it does not vanish. It waits until the conditions of control weaken in order to present itself. Jung spoke very clearly about this nature when he wrote, "The shadow is a moral problem that challenges the whole ego personality, for no one can become conscious of the shadow without considerable moral effort." Jung called the shadow a moral problem, not because it is evil, but because acknowledging it forces the ego to relinquish familiar illusions about itself. It compels a person to confront parts that do not align with the image they have relied on to know who they are, to feel okay, right, and acceptable. For this reason, the shadow rarely appears as an enemy to be defeated. It appears as a quiet but weighty demand. Look at me, because I carry the energy you lost along the path of adaptation. Many people misunderstand this moment. They believe that when strong emotions arise at night, anger without clear cause, sadness unlinked to specific memories, vague longing, jealousy, or even inappropriate fantasies, it is a sign of breakdown or imbalance. But for Jung, this often means the opposite. It indicates that the psyche is attempting to reclaim life force long suppressed by constant adaptation to norms, roles, and external expectations. A metaphor very close to Jung's view of the shadow is that of a disconnected electrical current. When part of a system is cut off because it is deemed unsafe, the system may still function, but it grows quietly weaker. On the surface, stability remains, but inner vitality is missing. The shadow does not bring meaningless chaos, it carries the forgotten current. And when that current returns, it is not gentle, not pleasant, but it allows the system to begin living again. This structure appears very clearly in literature, particularly in Robert Louis Stevenson's Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Jekyll does not create Hyde because he is evil, but because he is too proper. He embodies a perfect persona, moral, intellectual, socially respected. But because all life impulses that did not fit that image were excluded from consciousness, they did not disappear. They accumulated. Hyde is not newly created evil, but suppressed life energy returning in a distorted form. Jung viewed this story as an almost perfect illustration of the split between consciousness and the shadow. Notably, Hyde does not appear during the day. He emerges only in darkness, when control weakens. Not to destroy Jekyll, but to reclaim the life Jekyll sacrificed in order to be accepted. The tragedy lies not in the existence of the shadow, but in the fact that it is only allowed to exist in extreme form because it is never consciously acknowledged. Jung never advised people to indulge the shadow, nor did he call for its elimination. He simply warned that failing to acknowledge the shadow results in a life without vitality. A moral life disconnected from life energy, according to Jung, is a depleted life. And it is precisely on nights like these, when the persona has fallen away and consciousness has retreated, that the shadow can appear not as a saboteur, but as a message carrying energy. The shadow does not speak in rational language. It does not deliver lessons or directions. It appears through feeling, unexplained pressure, nameless urges, seemingly causeless anger, or desires that do not know where to go. The ego's habitual response is to suppress, to regain control, to label these experiences as negative and eliminate them quickly. But Jung warned that every attempt to repress the shadow only causes it to return with greater force, often in indirect and less controllable forms. This is not an invitation to plunge into darkness, but a reminder that light cannot be built upon denial. The shadow does not need to be acted out, it needs to be acknowledged. And the act of acknowledgement alone, without rushing to conclude or explain, is already a profound movement in psychic life. The core of this section lies here. The shadow does not appear to immediately change your life. It appears to show that you have lived too long with only one part of yourself. Ignoring the shadow does not make you worse. It makes you weaker. When life energy is split, a person becomes more polite, more proper, but also more depleted, emptier, and more easily exhausted. One night is not enough to integrate the shadow. One night is not enough to heal. But one night can be enough for you to feel where energy has been lost, and to realize that life needs not only to be right, but to have force. And sometimes, that realization alone, on a very quiet and undramatic night, is enough for life to begin shifting in another direction. Not a better direction, but a fuller one. And that is how the shadow enters the story of change, not as a promise, but as a very quiet demand. Allow me to exist, so that you may live with your full vitality. We have now traveled more than half of the journey, and I genuinely want to thank you for your patient and honest presence here. Before we go deeper, allow yourself to pause for a moment. Slow your breathing by 1 beat and listen to your own heartbeat as a way of confirming that you are still staying with this experience. If what you have just heard touched you, if you recognized a reflection of yourself in the story of the shadow and the energy once suppressed, please press like on this video as a sign of acknowledging the inner journey you are on, and also as a very quiet commitment that you are choosing not to turn away from what is asking to be seen within you. Number 8. Dreams do not explain, they orient. After the shadow has been felt as a demand to reclaim life energy, after a person realizes that they have lived too long with only one part of themselves, the psyche does not immediately provide explanations or a new plan. Jung believed that the unconscious does not work like reason. It does not argue, teach, or persuade. And very often, the next way it chooses to intervene is not through thought, but through dreams. From Jung's perspective, dreams do not exist to tell you whether you are right or wrong, good or bad, should or should not. Dreams are not moral, nor are they meant to reform a person according to any ideal. They are simply a self-regulating mechanism of the psyche, appearing when daytime consciousness has leaned too far in one direction. When conscious life becomes too rigid, too adaptive, too one-sided, dreams arise as a compensatory force, not to judge, but to balance. Jung expressed this nature very clearly when he wrote, "Dreams are impartial, spontaneous products of the unconscious psyche, outside the control of the will." Jung called this the compensatory function of the unconscious, not to correct errors, but to indicate deviation, not to tell you what to do, but to show where you are standing within yourself. And for that reason, dreams do not compel. They do not demand change. They simply present an image, a movement, a feeling, as if saying, if you continue in this direction, this is the rest of the picture. Many people approach dreams with the wrong attitude from the outset. They want to decode, to understand, to turn dreams into clear messages that can be immediately applied. But Jung warned that in doing so, people impose the logic of consciousness onto a language that does not belong to it. Dreams do not operate through concepts. They operate through images, rhythm, emotion, and association. They do not provide answers. They orient attention. Dreams can be imagined as an inner compass. A compass does not tell you how far to go, nor how fast or slow. It only shows where your current direction is leaning. You may continue. You may also stop. The compass does not force you. But if you ignore it for too long, you will drift further away from yourself without understanding why. In a Jungian therapy session, a young woman once described a recurring dream that appeared over many nights. In the dream, she finds herself standing in her childhood home. Everything is familiar, but one detail is strange. All the windows are shut, and there is no light inside the house. She is not afraid, nor does she panic. There is only a faint sense of suffocation, as if the air is slowly running out. She moves from room to room, turning on lights, but none of them work. No one appears. There is no dialogue. Only the silent house and the feeling of not having enough space to breathe. During the day, her life appears stable. She has a family, relationships, and an okay image in the eyes of others. But upon reflection, she realizes that she has lived too long in the role of the pleaser, the one who causes no trouble, the one who always maintains harmony. The dream does not say she is wrong. It does not tell her to change any relationship. It simply places her back into an old inner space where the windows, the capacities for expression, were closed very early. Not to conclude, but to feel. What matters is that the dream did not disappear when she understood it. It gradually subsided when she began allowing herself to breathe differently in daily life, very slightly, very slowly, and without announcing it to anyone. Not because she obeyed the dream, but because the dream had completed its orienting function. That is why Jung never treated dreams as codes that must be cracked. He saw them as ongoing conversation. And like any deep conversation, if you rush to impose meaning, you will hear nothing at all. Dreams do not want to be solved. They want to be left alone, reflected upon, allowed to leave an aftertaste. Perhaps that is why many songs touch this layer without philosophy. In the song Let It Be, there is the line, "There will be an answer, let it be." Not force it, not figure it out, but let it be. Dreams are the same. They do not come to be controlled, but to be allowed. Perhaps the most important lesson Jung left in his view of dreams lies not in analytical technique, but in the attitude toward life that dreams invite. Dreams do not demand that you become deeper, wiser, or evolve faster. They ask one simple but difficult thing in modern life. Can you slow down enough not to abandon yourself? In a world that constantly pressures people to be clear, efficient, and decisive, dreams remind us that not everything valuable needs to be explained immediately. Jung believed that when people learn to listen to dreams without forcing them to serve consciousness, they begin to live in a different relationship with themselves. No longer a relationship of control, but one of dialogue. Not so that the unconscious takes over life from consciousness, but so that consciousness no longer assumes itself to be the sole center. There, a person does not live by only one part, nor are they swept away by blind impulses, but begins to move within a fragile yet more vibrant balance. One night of listening to dreams will not make you wiser the next morning, but it may make you less rigid, less certain that you already understand everything. And sometimes, that very uncertainty is the starting point of a more authentic life. Not a life that is correct by standards, roles, or expectations, but a life capable of self-adjustment when it drifts off course. Therefore, it only takes one night to change your life does not mean that one night will give you answers. It means that one night in which you do not run from the quiet signals of yourself can begin to alter the direction of an entire life. Not loudly, not dramatically, but deeply enough that you can no longer return to living as before. Number 9. ANIMA/ANIMUS, the rebalancing of inner polarity. If the earlier layers of the night loosened the structure of consciousness and allowed deeper forces to begin operating, then at this level, the night touches a point that is extremely subtle yet decisive in the long run. The imbalance between the two inner gendered poles and the quiet but unavoidable need for rebalancing. According to Carl Jung, every human being carries within them two complementary psychological poles. Not in the sense of biological sex, but in terms of the operating principles of the psyche. One pole is oriented toward action, differentiation, structure, decisiveness, control, and outward direction. The other pole is oriented toward feeling, connection, receptivity, subjective depth, and the capacity to remain with experience. Jung called these two poles anima and animus, But he always emphasized that they are not social roles, nor identities to be displayed or performed. They are silent principles that govern how a person relates to themselves and to life. During the day, society rarely allows these two poles to coexist in balance. Roles, responsibilities, and collective expectations often force a person to identify with one pole in order to survive and be recognized. Some people live almost entirely through the pole of control, reason, planning, efficiency, and the ability to keep themselves together. Others are drawn toward the opposite pole, emotional reactivity, excessive sensitivity, and dissolution into circumstances. In both cases, a part of psychological life is pushed out of the light not because it is wrong, but because it does not fit the daytime structure the person is maintaining. Jung believed that this prolonged suppression is the deep source of many life crises. Not because people lack goals or willpower, but because they have lived too long from one pole, while the other has been deemed dangerous, weak, or unnecessary. When this imbalance persists, life may still appear fine on the surface, but vitality gradually drains away. The feeling of being alive becomes flat, and vague disturbances begin to emerge that cannot be tied to any specific cause. Night creates an entirely different condition. When the persona has fallen away, when the ego no longer occupies the position of central coordinator, the two inner poles have their first opportunity to encounter each other without being forced into fixed roles. Not to merge and not to dominate one another, but to temporarily coexist within the same psychological space. This encounter rarely takes the form of clear thought. It appears through sensation, a softening in someone accustomed to rigidity, or an inner straightening in someone accustomed to dissolving. Not a change in personality, but an adjustment of the axis. Jung once wrote a sentence that is crucial here. A man who has not passed through the inferno of his passions has never overcome them. He was not speaking of passion in the impulsive sense, but of inner forces that had been excluded from consciousness because they did not fit the daytime image. When one pole is denied for too long, it does not disappear. It accumulates, waiting for the moment when the ego loosens its grip to return. Night is precisely that moment. This rebalancing can be seen clearly in the experience of a woman who had lived for many years through sensitivity and adaptation. In most relationships, she listened, yielded, and kept everything smooth. No one forced her to do so. It was simply how she existed safely. Over time, however, a vague fatigue appeared, even though there were no clear conflicts or dramatic events. One night, in familiar stillness, she felt a very strange force rise within her. Not anger, not rebellion, but an inner firmness, as if something was saying that she could no longer continue dissolving into others. She did not act, did not explain, did not decide. She simply allowed the feeling to exist. The next morning, everything external was the same. But in very small interactions, she no longer automatically agreed, no longer rushed to soothe, no longer carried other people's emotions for them. Not because she became cold, but because another pole within her, the pole of differentiation and boundary setting, had been allowed to appear. Jung would say this was not a personality change, but the animus being restored to its necessary place so that the anima would no longer continue to dissolve. From a modern scientific perspective, there are striking parallels here. Research on the brain shows that during deep sleep and states of reduced conscious control, functional polarization between brain networks decreases. Regions associated with planning, goal control, and evaluation reduce activity, while regions associated with emotion, imagery, and experiential integration increase connectivity. The brain does not rest, but redistributes resources among systems that have been unevenly prioritized during the day. Although science does not use Jungian language, the structure is very close. The system seeks to restore balance between operational poles that have been unevenly favored. Night does not create change. It simply allows a long-delayed balance to begin. What matters is this: rebalancing does not come through a decision. You cannot choose to integrate anima or animus. Any active effort usually only creates more control. The only requirement is not to obstruct the process once it begins. And night, with the natural withdrawal of daytime consciousness, is the rare space in which this can occur. Thus, it only takes one night to change your life. At this level does not speak of action, nor of insight. It speaks of a shift in the inner axis. When the two psychological poles are allowed to encounter each other, even for a single night, life begins to operate with a different rhythm. Vague crises settle, not because answers have been found, but because the system is no longer skewed. And once the axis has shifted, life cannot continue along the old trajectory, even if the surface has not yet changed. From Jung's perspective, it is precisely this moment of inner axis shift that produces the most durable change in life, because it occurs at a level beyond the reach of personal will. When anima and animus are allowed to stand closer together, a person no longer has to expend energy maintaining a prolonged imbalance. The feeling of being alive thus becomes deeper and denser, though not necessarily more pleasant. You may find yourself less impulsive, but also less numb, less controlling, but also less dissolved. Jung described this as the state in which the psyche begins to self-regulate, rather than being stretched taut by opposing roles. And what is crucial is this: this change does not need to be expressed outwardly. It does not require you to live differently right away, nor does it demand that you redefine yourself. It simply places you in a new inner stance, one in which you no longer have to constantly fight yourself. From that stance, later choices, small or large, will naturally carry a different quality. Not because you have become more determined, but because you are no longer skewed. And sometimes that alone is enough to ensure that a life cannot return to its former way of being. Number 10. The moment the ego loses its veto power. If at the previous level, dream images quietly oriented without explanation, then at this level, something deeper begins to happen. It is not the unconscious that speaks, but the ego that no longer has the strength to deny what it has seen. There is no conflict, no climax, only a very dense silence, in which the ego that usually coordinates daytime life for the first time cannot utter its familiar phrase, "Not yet sure." For most of life, the ego exists not through brute force, but through its ability to postpone truth. It does not need to deny outright. It only needs to render what is uncomfortable as not the right time. The ego is very skilled at this. It knows how to rationalize, how to soothe, how to lead you into another line of thought that is reasonable enough for you to continue living as before without feeling that you are deceiving yourself. And because life continues to function, because roles are still fulfilled, the ego remains trusted as the legitimate driver. But Jung believed there are truths that require no further proof to become effective. They only need to be seen from the correct depth. At that point, the question is no longer right or wrong, should or should not, but this: you can no longer pretend that you do not know. This is the moment the ego loses its veto power. Not because it collapses dramatically, but because it has no ground left to stand on. Imagine a person who has lived in a relationship long enough for everything to become familiar. Nothing is clearly wrong. No one harms anyone. Life flows, remains calm, remains fine by all external standards. Yet within that calm, the person always has to adjust themselves slightly, remain silent a little more, yield a little more, ignore a vague feeling so that nothing is disturbed. The ego functions smoothly, saying that this is maturity, that everyone must make such sacrifices, that the feeling is not significant enough to be named. Until one night, lying in bed and staring at the ceiling, the person suddenly sees something very simple. It is not that the relationship is tiring. It is that they are no longer themselves within it. Not a thought, not a conclusion, just a truth appearing with clarity. And from that moment, the ego can no longer deny it. The person may not act immediately, may still stay, still hesitate, but the capacity to live as if they did not know has quietly ended. This moment usually arrives very quietly. It does not feel like a decision. It does not carry the sense of, from tomorrow, I will be different. It comes as a silent recognition, almost without emotion. Ah, so that's it. No conclusion, no accompanying action, but no way back to the previous state. Jung saw this as an irreversible threshold, because from that instant, the ego can no longer negotiate with truth. This structure is clearly visible in a familiar biblical story, the night before Peter denies Christ 3 times. It is not the act of denial itself that is pivotal, but the moment the rooster crows. When the sound rings out, no one accuses him. There is no moral lecture, no immediate punishment. Only one stark thing occurs. Peter knows that he knows who he was in that moment. And the Bible records briefly, he went outside and wept. Not because he decided to change, but because he could no longer deny the truth about himself. What is notable is this: after that moment, Peter's life does not immediately change. He does not instantly become a different person. But from that point on, he no longer lives in the same unconsciousness as before. His ego can no longer say, I am loyal, I am strong, I would never do that. The truth has been seen, and what has been seen cannot be taken back. Jung viewed this moment as a turning point of awareness. He believed people do not truly change when they become more determined, but when an old self-image can no longer be maintained. And that image usually collapses not through action, but through a moment of direct seeing, when the ego has no time to erect its familiar defenses. The ego is like a gatekeeper of consciousness. For years, it decides what is allowed in and what must be kept outside. But at a certain point, some truths no longer pass through the gate. They appear inside. At that moment, the gatekeeper is not defeated. He simply becomes irrelevant. The gate is not broken. It is bypassed. What makes this moment decisive is this: nothing has yet been done. There is no action, no life change, no external turning point, but the inner axis has shifted. And Jung emphasized that such shifts are what shape a person's long-term fate, not the impulsive decisions that may follow. Jung once wrote, Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. This sentence is often understood as a call to action, but it actually speaks of awareness. When truth has not been seen, it operates life from behind the scenes. When truth has been seen, even if you do nothing yet, it no longer operates as blind fate. It becomes a reality the ego must account for in every step thereafter. The moment the ego loses its veto power often carries a very particular feeling, not dramatic, not relieving, not intensely painful, but an irreversible settling. Many describe it as seeing a crack in a wall they once believed to be solid. You may continue standing beside the wall. You may not break it yet, but you can no longer believe it does not exist. What matters is this: Jung did not claim that from this moment onward, people must live better or more correctly. He only said that life will no longer operate through denial. And when denial is no longer an option, the entire logic of living slowly changes, even without conscious effort. Thus, the point of no return does not lie in action. It lies in the position of awareness. Once you have seen, you may delay, fear, hesitate, but you cannot return to the state of not having seen. The ego can negotiate with circumstances, but it cannot negotiate with a truth that has been seen from depth. It only takes one night to change your life. At this level is not a promise, it is a precise description. A night quiet enough, empty enough, stripped of familiar defenses, for the ego to lose its veto. And when that happens, life does not need to change immediately. It only needs time to catch up with an awareness that has already moved ahead. From that moment on, you may still live in the same circumstances, hold the same roles, and say nothing outwardly. But inside, something has ended. The capacity to live without knowing what you are doing to yourself. And sometimes, that alone, on a very ordinary night, is enough to put an end to an old life, even before a new one has begun. Before going deeper, pause for a moment and ask yourself what in this section touched you. If you recognize that you have experienced or are standing very close to the moment when the ego can no longer say its familiar, not yet sure, leave a single word in the comments. Seen. No explanation, no story. Just one word, as a quiet marker, acknowledging that something within you has been looked at directly. Sometimes, that small act itself is a way of not turning away from a truth you have already recognized. Number 11. Practical Story 2. A Night of Writing the Truth. If in the previous layer, the ego began to lose its veto power in a moment of silent awareness, when it no longer had the strength to say the familiar, not yet sure, then at this level, the truth touches the concrete life of a very ordinary person. Not through an event, not through a decision, but through an action so small it could be dismissed as meaningless. Writing down a sentence that had always been kept in silence. Lisa is 42 years old. She lives near her mother, sees her often, and speaks with her regularly. There are no major conflicts, no intense arguments. From the outside, their relationship appears to be what people call close, caring, a proper family. There is nothing to complain about, and no obvious reason to question anything. Lisa's mother is not authoritarian. She does not impose through commands or overt control. She simply worries, asks questions, and offers advice. Her familiar phrases are always wrapped in a tone of concern. I'm just telling you. I'm not forcing you. You decide. I worry. That's why I ask. And for many years, Lisa learned to receive these as a natural part of family life, without much thought. The issue does not lie in those specific words, but in the recurring feeling Lisa experiences whenever she is about to do something her own way. A very familiar, very small, yet very persistent feeling, needing to explain a bit more, soften a bit more, choose words carefully so as not to disappoint her mother. Lisa does not feel controlled. She simply feels that she must constantly adjust, and her ego handles that adjustment very well. The ego says this is filial duty, that her mother is old and should not be made to worry, that all families are like this. The ego does not deny the discomfort. It simply relegates it to a secondary position, making it insufficiently important to stop and look at directly. And because life continues to function, because there is no clear tragedy, Lisa continues living this way without naming anything as a problem. She does not think she is sacrificing too much. She thinks she is simply playing her role correctly. Until one very ordinary night. Nothing happened between Lisa and her mother that day. No argument, no harsh words. The day passed calmly. In the evening, Lisa sat alone in her room and opened her notebook. Not to write an emotional diary or deep reflections, but simply to jot down a few tasks for the next day, a very practical and familiar habit. But when the pen touched the paper, instead of a to-do list, another sentence appeared, very naturally, as if it had been waiting for a long time. I always have to be the most agreeable version of myself when I'm with my mother. Lisa stopped and reread the sentence. No strong emotion surged, no anger, no sadness, only a very clear inner silence, a silence that did not need to be filled. And then, as if something had been unlocked, the next lines appeared, not quickly or forcefully, but very directly. I'm not afraid of my mother being angry. I'm afraid of disappointing her. And because of that fear, I become used to not saying everything. This was not the first time Lisa had thought about this, but it was the first time it appeared on paper without being softened. There was no, but she also had it hard. No, maybe I'm too sensitive. The ego is usually very good at intervening at precisely that point to balance the story, to keep everything comfortably the same. But in that moment, the ego could not perform its familiar function. Not because it was weak, but because what had been written no longer required argument. Lisa did not cry, nor did she feel relieved. The state was strange, both ordinary and irreversible. She realized that from this moment on, she could no longer fully believe the old story that everything is fine, even though nothing had changed on the surface. Jung called this the moment when the ego loses its veto power, not because something new appears, but because a truth has been seen at a depth where the ego can no longer postpone it. Jung once wrote, "We cannot change anything until we accept it." He was not speaking of subsequent action, but of the point where awareness surpasses the ego's capacity for self-persuasion. Lisa closed the notebook. She did not decide to talk to her mother, did not plan to change the relationship, and did not label it toxic or wrong. No conclusion was drawn. But something had happened. The old axis, where she automatically placed her own feelings after her mother's, had been locked. The next day, Lisa still called her mother, and the conversation unfolded as usual. But in a very small moment, when her mother commented on a personal matter, Lisa noticed clearly that she was listening without automatically shrinking herself. Not because she tried to be different, but because the old mechanism no longer functioned as smoothly as before. The ego could still say, maybe next time, but it could no longer say, it's fine, with the same convincing force. A truth written once could no longer be entirely dismissed. What matters is that there was no immediate change. The relationship remained the same, behavior remained similar. But from that night on, Lisa was no longer completely unconscious in her silence, and it was precisely this loss of unconsciousness that became irreversible. Jung did not believe that every truth must be acted upon immediately. He was very cautious about turning awareness into hasty action, because for Jung, the danger lies not in delaying action, but in continuing to live as if one does not know what one already knows. That night of writing, the truth ended that possibility for Lisa. She would still have nights of hesitation, still moments of wanting to return to the old comfort. But from now on, each time she chose silence, she knew what she was choosing and what it cost. The ego could no longer veto through innocence. One night of writing the truth did not make Lisa stronger, nor did it make her free immediately, but it did one very concrete and decisive thing. It closed the door back to the state of not knowing. And for Jung, it is precisely that moment, not action or decision, that marks the true end of an old life. Number 12. Individuation begins quietly. And from the moment a truth is seen to the point where you can no longer return to the state of not knowing, your inner life begins to enter a different movement. No major decision is made, and no visible change appears from the outside. Yet internally, a person no longer reacts entirely as before. Something has shifted very subtly. You begin to recognize your emotions earlier, notice your own silence more clearly, and can no longer easily live against what you have already understood about yourself. Jung called this silent process individuation. Individuation, according to Jung, is not about becoming the best version of oneself, nor about perfecting some ideal image. It is the gradual process of integrating parts of the psyche that have been split off, denied, or lived through roles. For most of life, people exist in fragments. One part for society, one for family, one pushed into the shadow, one never touched. Individuation does not erase these parts, but allows them to gradually stand together within the same inner space, without forcing them to be the same and without a rigid controlling center. The paradox is this: when individuation begins, the person involved rarely feels that they are progressing. On the contrary, they often feel that everything becomes slower, less dramatic, and harder to describe. There are no more explosive moments of realization, no major symbolic decisions, only a very subtle change in how they are with themselves. Old reactions are no longer automatic, familiar roles no longer fully fit, yet no new roles have appeared to replace them. Jung once wrote a very famous line that is often misunderstood: "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." He was not speaking of discovering a hidden identity that already exists somewhere. He was speaking of a living process in which a person gradually stops living on behalf of what they are not, so that what has been split can meet again. And that process, according to Jung, rarely begins with light. It usually begins with a quieting. After the moment the ego loses its veto power, as in Lisa's story, individuation does not appear as a clear new path. It appears as a very small shift in inner gravity. Subsequent choices are not necessarily more correct, but they are no longer completely disconnected from inner felt life. People begin to find it difficult to do certain things they once did easily, not because those things are wrong, but because they no longer align with the new order forming within. At the same time, they begin to tolerate things they previously avoided, not because they have become stronger, but because they no longer need to expend so much energy maintaining inner division. Individuation can be imagined as an underground river. On the surface, the landscape looks the same. Outsiders see no difference. But beneath, the current has shifted so subtly that only after a long distance does one realize the river no longer flows toward its old destination. Individuation does not require you to declare, "I am changing." It only requires that you stop resisting what has been seen. From a modern scientific perspective, even without Jungian language, there are descriptions closely aligned with this process. Research in neuroscience and developmental psychology shows that after moments of deep awareness, the nervous system does not immediately produce new behavior, but enters a phase of quiet reorganization. Old networks gradually lose priority, while new connections form very slowly, sometimes too weak to be noticed subjectively. This is a phase of reintegration, where the system learns to operate with less internal conflict, but also with fewer immediate rewards. There is no climax, only gradual stabilization at a deeper level. This explains why individuation is often unappealing as a story. It gives no success narrative, no new identity to display. It simply changes how you show up in very small moments, how you are silent differently, how you say yes or no differently, how you remain with a difficult feeling without needing to explain it to anyone else. And because there are no clear milestones, many people believe nothing is happening, when in fact a profound process of individuation is underway. Jung warned that individuation is not a path meant to be seen. The deeper you go, the less need you feel to prove where you are, not because you become indifferent, but because you no longer require external validation to legitimize inner experience. This makes the process invisible, but also makes it durable. It only takes one night to change your life. At this level does not refer to the event of that night, but to the fact that from that night onward, life is no longer operated entirely by fragmented parts. Some previously split elements begin to coexist, awkwardly, imperfectly, not yet harmonized. And individuation does not require you to integrate everything at once. It only asks that you stop denying the existence of those parts. Perhaps the hardest thing for the modern ego to accept is that the most important process of life can unfold without leaving any visible mark to be proud of or to recount. No one notices, not even you, for a long time. And then, on a very ordinary day, you realize that you no longer have to strain yourself to be someone. Not because you have found yourself, but because the parts that were once split are no longer fighting each other so fiercely. And if one were to speak of changing your life in the way Jung understood it, it would not mean achieving something, but no longer being torn apart by unlived parts. One quiet night may not give you answers, but it can initiate a process after which life cannot return to its former state. Not loudly, not triumphantly, just a very deep shift where individuation begins in silence, exactly as Jung always described it, unseen by anyone, yet irreversible. Number 13. The morning after, the same world, a new inner position. So what actually happens the next morning, when no miracle appears, when the outer world remains exactly as it was, and life offers you no clear sign that the night just past has changed anything. Jung's answer often disappoints those who are looking for drama, yet it is remarkably precise if one looks at how psychological life truly operates. Almost nothing changes in the circumstances, but the position from which you experience those circumstances has shifted. And it is precisely this silent difference that makes life, however slowly, unable to continue along the old trajectory. The morning after an inner axis shift does not begin with a powerful feeling. You do not wake up with new excitement, nor do you feel suddenly awakened or spectacularly clear. You wake up in the same familiar room, facing the same relationships, the same schedule, the same responsibilities as the day before. From the outside, no one could say that you have just gone through a turning point. But inside, something very subtle has changed. You are no longer standing in the same old place from which you react to life. Previously, most of your reactions were automatic. You knew what to say to maintain harmony, when to stay silent so things would pass, where to try harder so as not to disappoint anyone. These reactions were not wrong, but they arose from a very specific inner position, the position of someone trying to maintain stability by placing themselves after circumstances. After a night of inner reorientation, that position does not disappear, but it is no longer the only starting point. You begin to sense a very small distance between experience and reaction, a slight pause, just enough that you are no longer completely swept along by old inertia. When the unconscious has not been seen, life unfolds like fate, like a sequence of things that are simply how they must be. But when even a small part has been seen, fate begins to lose its sense of inevitability. Not because you now control life, but because you are no longer entirely directed from a blind spot. A viewer of the channel once described his morning after like this. He still went to work, still sat in his familiar office, still listened to the same old conversations. But there was one very small moment when a colleague made a familiar remark that used to trigger his pride. This time the feeling still arose, but it did not pull along the habitual reaction. He did not rush to defend himself, nor did he feel the need to prove anything. Not because he had become more noble, but because somewhere inside he had realized that he no longer needed that reaction to protect an inner image that had already begun to crack the night before. The same situation, but the color of the experience was different. This change is very difficult to explain in ordinary language because it is not a deliberate behavioral change. It is like standing up from a familiar chair and moving to a different position within the same room. The room has not changed. The furniture is the same, but the entire perspective is different. What was previously out of view now appears, and what once occupied all attention now recedes. Jung called this a shift in the center of experience, and for him, this was the deepest form of change a human being could undergo. An image that can clarify this is adjusting the focus of a camera lens. When the focal length changes, the scene remains the same. The light is the same, but sharpness is distributed differently. What was once blurry becomes clearer. What was once overly sharp softens. No new scene is created, yet the photograph is no longer the same photograph. The morning after an inner axis shift has the same structure. Life has not changed, but the way it appears to you has. What matters is this. This difference is not always pleasant. Many people assume that when the inner world shifts, life will become lighter. But Jung never promised that. Often, it is the opposite. Life may become clearer and therefore sharper. Things you previously endured unconsciously now appear with their full weight. Not to make you suffer more, but because you are no longer completely dissociated from experience. This new clarity does not bring immediate happiness, but it brings truth. One woman said that after the night she wrote down the truth, the next morning she did not feel stronger at all. On the contrary, she felt more fragile when facing familiar choices. But that very fragility was a sign that she was no longer using her old hardened shell to move through life. She did not act differently right away, but each time she repeated an old behavior, she felt very clearly its inner cost. And it was precisely that clarity that caused later choices, however slowly, to begin shifting. Jung was consistent on this point. Change does not begin with doing something different, but with no longer being able to experience life in the same old way. Once the inner position has shifted, behavior sooner or later must adjust to align with that new position. Not because you force yourself to change, but because the old way becomes harder to sustain, not morally, but psychologically. The morning after, therefore, is not the beginning of a new life in an external sense. It is the first day of living from a different inner stance, where you are no longer completely pulled along by old inertia. You may still choose to return to familiar reactions, but you no longer do so unconsciously. And for Jung, it is precisely the end of unconsciousness that changes a person's fate in the deepest sense. It only takes one night to change your life. At this level is not a promise that everything will be better the next morning. It is a very precise description of how psychological life operates. One night is enough for the inner position to shift, and from that position, the same world will never again be experienced in the same way. Not because the world has changed, but because you are no longer standing in the same place to look at it. And perhaps that is why the deepest changes in a person's life often go unnoticed by others, even by the person experiencing them. There is no clear timestamp, no declaration, no external sign, only a very ordinary morning in which the world is still the old world. But inner life has begun to follow a different logic, and from that moment on, however slowly, the road ahead cannot fully return to its old direction. Before closing this section, I invite you to pause for a moment and ask yourself what your own morning after has been like. If you have ever experienced the sense that the world remained the same while something inside you stood in a different place. Leave a very short sentence in the comments. Perhaps simply, "I realized I was no longer the same." No need to explain, no need to analyze. Sometimes, daring to name that moment in words is enough to prevent you from returning to the old position, and it may also become a quiet signal to someone else passing through the same threshold of change. Number 14. Why not everyone has a transformative night? At this stage, another truth gradually emerges. Not everyone passes through the night in the same way. Some pass through and shift their axis. Others pass through as well, remain silent, feel tired, yet the next morning return to the exact same position as before, as if the night were nothing more than a biological pause. Jung answered this question not through morality, nor by categorizing people as deep or shallow, but through a cold psychological observation. Not everyone stays long enough in the ambiguous zone for a real movement to occur. And not staying is not always unconscious. Very often, it is a psychological choice, even if the person does not name it as such. The ambiguous zone Jung refers to is not romantic darkness or a mystical state. It is a very concrete space that appears when familiar structures have loosened, but no new structure has yet formed. The ego no longer fully controls, but nothing clear has emerged to replace it. The old answers are gone, but no new answers have arrived. This state is not intensely painful, but it is deeply uncomfortable because it strips away the sense of certainty that modern people rely on to feel safe. Many people cannot tolerate precisely this point, not because they are weak, but because they are too accustomed to having a clear story about themselves. When that story begins to crack at night, the ego's first reflex is not to face it, but to create interference. It tries to fill the gap as quickly as possible with thoughts, actions, explanations, reason, or by returning to familiar habits that once helped it feel okay. There is a very interesting biblical story often read as a test of faith, but when viewed through a Jungian lens, it reveals a clear psychological structure. When Moses led the Israelites out of Egypt, they were not taken directly to the Promised Land, but wandered for 40 years in the desert. The desert here is not only geographical. It is the state of no longer being in the old Egypt, but not yet in the new Promised Land. There are no familiar structures, no guarantees, no stable rhythm of life. And it is precisely in this desert that many begin to complain, doubt, and even long to return to Egypt, despite having been enslaved there. From a psychological perspective, this is the moment when people cannot endure the transitional zone. Egypt, however harsh, is familiar. The desert is free, but empty, ambiguous, and offers the ego no foothold. Many choose to return psychologically, even if they cannot return geographically. And the Bible is very clear. The generation that could not endure the desert did not enter the Promised Land. Not because they were punished, but because they could not remain long enough in the transitional state for a new order to form. Every process of transformation has such a desert, a phase with no clear reward, no stable identity, no quick answers. And not everyone is willing to go through it. Not because they are inferior, but because they choose familiar stability over unformed truth. Jung once wrote very bluntly, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, in order to avoid facing their own soul." Avoiding one's soul does not always take dramatic form. Very often it happens through entirely reasonable behaviors. Becoming busier, thinking more, analyzing more deeply, or convincing oneself that now is not the right time. All of these appear mature, but sometimes they are simply refined ways of not staying with what wants to be seen. A very everyday example is people who are constantly preparing for change, but never allow change to touch them. They read books, listen to podcasts, speak very deeply about themselves, but whenever a real feeling appears, a feeling that demands stopping, silence, not knowing, they immediately shift into analysis. Analysis here is no longer a tool of understanding, but a polite form of avoidance. The ego retains control by turning everything into concepts, so that direct experience can be avoided. What Jung wanted to emphasize was not that one should try to have a transformative night. That is meaningless. Transformation does not occur through effort, but through permission. And that permission requires one very specific thing: not returning to interference when inner truth begins to appear. This sounds simple, but in reality, it is one of the most difficult challenges of modern psychological life. Failure, in Jungian language, is not the absence of change. Failure is when people repeatedly turn away from moments that could change them and call it not ready yet, not the right time, or unnecessary. Jung did not judge this choice. He merely pointed out its consequence. Life will continue to operate along the same old axis, no matter how much the surface changes. A transformative night is not a reward for the good, nor a privilege of the deep. It is the result of staying long enough in an uncomfortable, unclear, and guarantee-free moment. Not everyone wants to pay that price, and according to Jung, not paying it is also a complete psychological choice with all its accompanying consequences. It only takes one night to change your life is therefore not a universal promise. It does not apply to everyone, not because they are unworthy, but because they may choose differently. To choose the familiar light over the ambiguous darkness. To choose known stability over formless truth. To choose to continue living through old mechanisms rather than accepting a phase of not knowing who one is. Jung did not try to persuade people to change. He simply drew a map and let each person decide where they wish to go. And on that map, there are no shortcuts. Either you stay in the desert long enough for a new order to form, or you return to the familiar psychological Egypt and call it reality. Both are choices. But only one allows a very rare night to become the starting point of a different life. And perhaps the hardest thing is not changing, but accepting that sometimes not changing is itself a choice we have made, even if we have never spoken it aloud. Number 15. One night is enough if it is a night you do not run from. After all the silent movements that have unfolded in the previous layers, when the ego lost its veto power, when truth was seen without requiring action, when the inner axis locked into place while outer life remained unchanged, the remaining question is no longer, was that night powerful enough? But something far simpler. During that night, did you stay with yourself or not? Not every night is the same. Most nights in life are merely biological continuations of the previous day. The body rests, the brain settles, but the psyche carries the same old mechanisms into sleep intact. There are nights when you sleep deeply and nothing changes. There are nights when you toss and turn, but only because you are tired. Jung never said that any night automatically brings transformation. He spoke of a very particular kind of night, not because it is longer, deeper, or more dramatic, but because in that night, a person does not run away. Running away here is not a concrete action. It rarely has a clear form. It does not necessarily mean leaving the room or picking up your phone. Running away, in the Jungian sense, is any attempt to quickly return to the familiar position of the ego. Rationalizing, reassuring, analyzing, blaming or soothing oneself with the thought that everything will be fine. These reactions are very subtle. They do not look negative. In fact, most of the time, they are considered mature, positive, and self-regulating. Yet they are precisely what allows a night to pass without leaving any trace in inner life. A night capable of changing a life is not a night when you find answers. It is a night when you allow the question to exist without rushing to fill it. It does not require you to be more courageous than usual. It only requires that you not betray what you are feeling, by retreating into the familiar stories the ego uses to keep everything in its old place. This can be understood very simply through an image. Imagine a person standing at a crossroads at night. There are no clear signs, no traffic passing by. The person does not know whether to turn left or right. If they rush to choose a direction simply to escape the feeling of suspension, they will continue moving, but not necessarily in the right direction. But if they stand still long enough, quiet enough, without forcing themselves to decide, the surrounding space will gradually reveal details that were previously unseen. Distant lights, faint sounds, the direction of the wind. A transformative night is like this. It does not give you a map. It only gives you time to stand still so you do not push yourself back onto the old road out of fear of ambiguity. A night without running away does not make you better, nor does it make you more correct. It simply makes you more honest for a very brief moment. Yet, that moment carries a particular weight, because it does not need to be repeated many times to take effect. One moment in which you do not betray your present feeling with familiar self-soothing is enough for the inner axis to shift slightly. And once the axis has shifted, you may delay, hesitate, and move very slowly. But you are no longer standing entirely in the old position. This also explains why many people read Jung, listen to Jung, understand Jung intellectually, yet never experience what he describes. Not because they lack understanding, but because they always return too quickly. They touch ambiguity and then leave. They feel something and immediately try to explain it, rationalize it, or turn it into a goal. And so the night passes without anything truly happening, even though on the surface it may appear very deep. One night is enough, but only if it is a night in which you do not betray yourself by running away from what is present. Not every night offers that opportunity, but psychological life, according to Jung, has its own rhythm. When enough conditions have converged, when the ego is tired, when the persona has loosened, when the shadow has knocked, when truth has been seen, only one thing more is required. You stay. Staying is not enduring, nor is it suffering. It is non-interference, not fixing, not correcting, not making the feeling right or pleasant. Just letting it be what it is, for a short enough time that you cannot rebuild the familiar defenses. Jung believed that the human psyche has a profound capacity for self-regulation if it is not forced. But that capacity is activated only when we stop interrupting it with haste. And perhaps this is the most modest yet most radical thing Jung left us. Transformation does not require much. It does not need to be continuous. It only needs the right moment and your willingness not to run. Just one such night, very ordinary, very quiet, very undramatic, is enough to reset the direction of an entire life ahead, even if it takes a very long time before you realize you are no longer walking the old path. It only takes one night to change your life is not a promise of a miracle after a single night's sleep, but a very different way of understanding transformation in the spirit of Carl Jung. This is not merely an article to read and forget, but an invitation into a silent ritual, the ritual of allowing yourself to meet yourself at the moment when consciousness loosens its grip. In the noisy rhythm of life, we often forget that night is not only for rest, but the time when the soul is permitted to reorganize what daytime does not allow. When the ego ceases to control, the unconscious begins its work, not loudly, not pedagogically, but quietly recalibrating. Perhaps by now, you have recognized a very Jungian truth. We are not exhausted because life is too harsh, but because we have lived too far from our true nature for too long. We are tired from having to be strong constantly, from having to be okay, from having to hold roles, from pretending that everything is fine. But when those defensive layers are allowed to fall away during a sufficiently quiet night, when you stop trying to sleep it off and simply allow the mind to be still, energy begins to return. The soul knows how to rebalance itself, how to reconnect parts that have been split, and you need do nothing more than allow it to happen. If this journey has touched you, share the video with someone who may be in need of a quiet enough night to listen to themselves. Because sometimes, just one night in which you do not turn away from yourself is enough to open a new journey. And if you wish to continue that journey, subscribe to the channel so we can go deeper, slower, and more honestly into the inner world together.